Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So, you ready for our afternoon? The morning, like, okay, let's do it. Let's meditate. Let's do this whole program. It's starting to level off, yeah. And you've had lunch. You're settling in. The temperature's gone up, and you say, okay, well, how do I sit and walk? Yeah, how do I keep focused now that that wave of energy has started to dissipate? And this is a lot of what practice is, yeah, because practice isn't about the results as much as it's about the recognition that we're setting in place causes and conditions, yeah. Our present and future happiness is conditioned by the decisions that we make right now. So saying whether or not it'll be easy, whether or not I know I'll get a good result from this particular sitting or going out and walking or listening to this Dhamma talk, you know that it's wholesome. You know that it's inclined towards the Dhamma and what you're trying to cultivate. And so you just trust. Just set yourself on this path and trust. And so the kernel of the Daylong was part of it was around becoming, but part of it was around how to practice the Eightfold Path. And this underlying notion that um, for many of us, we find that, we get up and we're like, okay, it's the weekend. It's a great time for practice. And then I don't want to. Or we see that, there's, okay, this is the time I've got. I'm not going to have time on Monday. So let's do it. And we crack open the Pali books and we get out all our things. So we're like, okay, I'm going to study Pali, and then we're like, okay, I'm going to study the suttas. Or like, okay, now I'm going to meditate, and then we get up and like, now I'm going to do walking meditation, and we do all these bunch of things because we're like, this is what it means to be practicing the Eightfold Path. This is what it means to be getting anywhere in my practice. Okay? And then lo and behold, at the end of the day, we might have found that, yeah, it's a mixed bag. Some of it we're like, wow, okay, yeah, I do feel a bit more peaceful. And some of it we're like, okay, yeah, I feel less peaceful. Like that was a lot of work. I'm kind of pooped. That was exhausting. I had stuff coming up. I had resistance to some of this stuff, and I got through it sometimes by being a good Buddhist, by like creating this identity and doing what I'm told and like following the list of instructions that I've been given. Because that's what we have to do, right? Walk the path, and then we'll get to the goal. And once we get to the goal, it'll be fine, right? And we can retire, and it'll just be smooth sailing. But we got to put in our time. And so we find that in the development of this practice, when we're given the do this, do this, do this, and the don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, sometimes we veer off to one side or the other. And there are three kinds of craving. The Buddha also breaks craving into threes. There's a lot of threes in Buddhism. There's a craving for sensuality. And this is sort of like what we talked about this morning. It's the notion we're kind of like abandoning the mental landscape in favor of the passive experience of receiving sense input. Our whole world is basically whatever's coming in through our senses, and we're assuming that that's real. And if that's our perspective, then we get very emotionally invested into what we see and hear and smell and taste and touch. On a very coarse level, like, oh, I really want to have something delicious to eat, or on a more superficial level, like, yeah, I don't want to live in this kind of climate. I'd rather live in that kind of climate and that sort of thing. The second kind of craving is craving for bhava, bhava tanha, the thirst for becoming. And this is where we're presented with this mental landscape. And we really want want things to be kind of bracketed. We want things to make sense. We want things to go in their boxes. Yeah. We want to have concepts to work with. We want identities. I can see all of you, and it can be just a group of people, or I can be like, oh, that's a Laura, that's Rachel, that's a so and so, that's and I can be like, oh, okay, I know who I'm talking to. They're a that. You get the little box, and you stuff your Andrew in the little box, and you close it, and you say, okay, he stays in the box. I know exactly what he's all about. I know it is like he's measurable. Literally, I could put him on a scale, and he's like he's this much. Yeah, and that's an Andrew. That's my container. But as we were just saying and reflecting on, does that work? Or does the moment that we do that, we fail to leave room for all of the new ways that the person might be? Yeah, or do we realize if we investigate even a little bit that we have misconceptions? That we put them into that box, but that doesn't really define them. Yeah. Maybe the person is wearing a hard hat and is uh, by the internet company, and they're coming to repair the wires, but maybe that's not their identity. That's their job. But maybe they haven't looked in a mirror in a couple of hours, and they've totally forgotten they are electrician guy. Yeah. And so somebody is like, oh, you're the electrician, and they're like, oh yeah, right. I, I I guess I'm still on the clock. I'm still doing that. Yeah, what do you need? And a lot of our life is like this. Somebody might come up to us, and they might hear us speak, and then be like, "Are you an American? Are you a Canadian? Are you Mexican? Are you so and so? Are you so and so?" And I'd be like, "Well, I didn't really think about it. I guess technically yes, but that wasn't what I was doing right then, or maybe I was, and I didn't realize it. But I wasn't like trying to fit in that box. Nevertheless, Bhava Tanha exists, right? Because we have this underlying tendency to create these little boxes, to create these existences, and to say that this is here, this is, you know, this exists. And the moment we do it, we've got a nice little package of information that we can work with instead of working with the thing, because the thing's going to keep changing. But our concept doesn't have to, yeah? And so we actually crave this. And this is that force where if you can imagine, just you don't need a body. You don't need to be in any particular time, or you don't need to be in a particular place. Yeah, you can be anywhere, do anything. You're like formless, just floating out in the ether, and you're okay. This is not like terror. This is not nothingness. It's like pure choice. It's like, okay, what do I want to do? Well, the very first inclination that comes up is going to drag you off into an existence, right? It's going to drag you towards something that you want to have happen, something that you want to see, or something that you want to experience, or even something that you want to do. But in order to do, you've got to exist to do it, right? And this craving for existence is going to draw you forth. Now, part of the way that the mind works is we don't need to crave karma. We don't need to crave doing for stuff to happen, because there is this causal process, because we already are alive. We already have consciousness arising, right? The causes and conditions are already there. We don't have to nurture it. And we don't have to worry that it would all just dissolve. But if it would that be such a big deal, knowing that everything changes, that things will still arise and cease, even if you don't become them, even if you don't search for them, even if you don't crave them. The third kind of craving is in relation to the second one, and it's called vibhavatana. And this is the craving for non-becoming. The V prefix before bhava means to separate, or to become distinct from, or to become free from. Yeah. And in relation to bhava, this means we have a craving to unbecome. And this is, it's not as simple as saying we have a craving for non existence, because even that is a paradox, right? I want to be nothing. Well, which is it? Do you want to be or do you want nothing? And that's the paradox, yeah? We can intellectually, it's so easy to say, I want to be nothing, but it's impossible to do because our concepts around being insist that we be, and the moment that we be, it's not really nothing. Yeah. But vibhava isn't craving for non-existence, it's a craving for unexistence. Yeah. It's a craving to be separated from an existence that we are perceiving to exist. And this is a craving that is like the other side of the coin. When we look at bhava, we just turn it over and we see vibhava. And we see that if we lose sight, if we get drawn into the craving for becoming and we lose sight of that's what's happening, then it seems to us the way to get out of these little boxes that we're putting ourselves into is to unmake the box, break the box, and then we can go on and become the next thing. And this is its own kind of craving. But it always exists in relation to something that we think exists. So you said we already have this causal process where we're already conscious. We already have a body. It's already living out its life. And whether or not we identify with it, that doesn't stop. It'll keep going based on its causes and conditions. We don't really need to get in the middle of it. But because of this, we also don't really need to break down any identity that we perceive is there. And if we perceive an identity being there, that is the problem. And if we then move into a mode where it's like, well, I'm an American, but it's an election year. I don't want to be an American. But they're like, so I've got to unmake being an American. I'm going to be something else. But in order to be something else, we have to stop being the thing that we are, right? This is what we mean by vibhava. We're trying to get away from that thing we are because we perceive it as being the source of our suffering. Again, as we begin to investigate the mind, we might start to see that it is, in fact, it's not the thing that we perceive that we are that is causing the suffering. Often it is the craving to get away from it that is creating all of the resistance, creating all of the friction and the suffering in that scenario. The friction and the suffering in that scenario. And to consider this, I just throw out there the question: is there a difference between not wanting to exist and wanting not to exist? Wanting not to exist or not wanting. Thanks, Laura. I got that. They're vibhava. They're different. Yeah, V. um, well, that's the thing, right? In terms of the world, no. You're trying to get away. You've got a result. You've got a product, and you're trying to get away from it. In that sense, it's the same, right? You want that thing that exists not to be. Well, so if you want that not to exist, or you don't want that to exist, it's kind of the same thing. Be gone. But in terms of mental training, these are two wildly divergent mental states. The wanting not to exist is vibhava tanha. The not wanting to exist is not. Yeah. Just because we don't want something to be there doesn't mean we're resisting it being there. So we don't actually have to counter all of our bhava tanha. We don't have to counter all of our becoming in order to eventually become free of becoming. Yeah, we don't have to fight each and every little instance of us identifying with something and imagining that something exists in order to be free of that becoming. Yeah, and in some ways, the more that we resist, the more we're creating the personality of resisting, the more we're creating the existence of fighting that, which is just more layers of existence. Yeah. So in terms of mental training, The difference is desire. What we want to get free of, what we want to get away from, is the desire to for the sensual world, or the desire for existence, or the desire to get away from things that we perceive existing. And what happens is, if we try to do all three of these things, we struggle, we suffer. Like, now I'm going to resist desire for the sensual world. Okay, now I'm going to resist becoming and having an ego and identifying with things. And now I'm going to resist resisting things. I'm going to not say no to anything. And I'm just gonna, and we do one, and as we're doing one, we're like, well, okay, I'm kind of neglecting those other two, but I'll get to it. And it's a struggle, yeah. So we're seeing these as different things, but in terms of mental training, it's meant to be one thing, yeah. And this is the difference between wanting not to exist and not wanting to exist, yeah. When we let go of the craving, we have let go of the driving force. As the Buddha said, if there was not karma being developed in relation to becoming, if there was not the actions and intentions and inclinations and the desire for existence in any one of the three modes, there would not then come to be existence in those three modes. The current existence would run out and a new one wouldn't be created, because that is driven by desire. So the solution is one thing, and it is what we call the Noble Eightfold Path. And while it seems like this is a lot of stuff that we have to do, and a lot of stuff we have to become, and a lot of stuff we have to get better at, so that we can put it on our resume and, get get hired for the Arahant Club, uh, it's not quite that complicated. Yeah. All of the Eightfold Path is primarily about relinquishing that which we are doing, that's what we are craving, that's what we are becoming. Yeah. And it's not prescriptive. It's not saying, okay, now you must be this. It's saying, let go of those. And then you're very close to the middle. And you've just got to find a way to stay there and to not let that craving come back to you. So we had a couple of suttas and kind of let this idea percolate, and then read the two suttas, and then we'll look a bit at the Eightfold Path and see if this will we get some ideas of how we might work with this afternoon. So, that seems familiar. All right, so Ananda is often the fall guy in suttas. He's often the guy who asks the simple-minded question so that everybody can benefit from the really eloquent and amazing response from the Buddha. But I just like every now and then you come across these examples of, well, he was also um, really attentive when it came to the Dhamma, yeah? And so this is Anguttara Nikaya 3, Book of the Threes, number 78. So very close to the sutta we were reading this morning. Then Venerable Ananda went to the Buddha, bowed, and sat down to one side. The Buddha asked him, Ananda, are all precepts and observances, lifestyles, and spiritual paths fruitful when taken as the essence? And Ananda responded in a very Buddha kind of way. He said, this matter is not categorical. And the Buddha said, okay, well then break it down, Ananda. And Ananda said, well, take the case of someone who cultivates precepts and observances, a lifestyle, spiritual path, taking this to be the essence. If, based on that, unskillful qualities grow while skillful qualities decline, then it's not fruitful. However, if unskillful qualities decline while skillful qualities grow, that is fruitful. And that's what Ananda said, and the teacher approved. Then Ananda, knowing that the teacher approved, got up from his seat, bowed, circled the Buddha, keeping him on his right, and left. Then, just as Ananda had left, the Buddha addressed the rest of the monks. Monks, Ananda is still a trainee, but it's not easy to find his equal in wisdom. Very simple sutta, very simple message, and not from an arahant, not from a fully awakened Buddha, but from a trainee like us, somebody who's walking the path and trying to figure it out. Ananda pretty clearly encapsulates what it is we're doing. Yeah? It's not so much about the precepts, the observances, the rituals, the going to the temple, the bowing, the doing pujas, the chanting, the paying respect to the monks or making offerings. It's not all of that, but it does include that. Yeah, we do all of these things that we've brought together into this category of, well, this is how I cultivate practice. This is how I develop. Yeah. But what it's really about is, do unskillful qualities diminish and skillful qualities grow? And that's our metric. It's not about becoming. It's not about whether or not we get credit for it. It's not about whether or not we do it well or it takes a long time. It's just that, does it work? Is it working for us? Is it making our life better? And if so, that's That's all. That's all we got to do. And that is a pretty simple way of describing the middle way. Yeah, is those precepts, observances, lifestyles, spiritual paths, that when, undertaken, cultivate the mind, develop the mind in the direction of peace and liberation. And another good little Ananda Sutta. Here, this is Book of the Threes, number 72, in the same chapter as the other ones. At one time, Venerable Ananda was staying near Kosambi in Kosata's monastery. Then a householder, who was a disciple of the Ajivikas or the Jains, went up to the Venerable Ananda, bowed, sat to one side, and said to Ananda, Venerable Ananda, whose teaching is well explained? Who in the world is practicing well? Who in the world has done well? And super like, well, the Buddha, he's who's practicing well, and the Dhamma is well explained, and the Sangha is those who are practicing well. But instead, Ananda responds like this. He says, well, householder, I'll ask you this in return. You can answer as you like. What do you think? Is the teaching of those who teach for giving up greed, hate, and delusion well explained or not? How do you see it? And the Jain says, well, the teaching of those who teach for giving up greed, hatred, and delusion is well explained. And that's how I see it. Nanda says, well, what do you think? Are those who are practicing for giving up greed, hatred, and delusion practicing well or not? Jain says, well, those who are practicing for giving up greed, hatred, and delusion, they are practicing well. So what do you think? Have those who have given up greed, hatred, and delusion, they've cut it off at the root, made it like a palm stump, obliterated it, and it is unable to arise in the future. Have they done well in the world or not? How do you see this? And he responds, well, those who have given up greed, hate, and delusion have done well in this world. That's how I see it. So Ananda says, so, householder, as you've declared, the teaching of those who teach for giving up greed, hate, and delusion is well explained. You've declared those who practice for giving up greed, hate, and delusion are practicing well. And you've declared those who have given up greed, hatred, and delusion have done well in this world. Now the Ajivika, the Jain, says, it's incredible, Venerable Sir, it's amazing. There's no acclaiming your own teaching or disrespecting someone else's. There's just teaching what is relevant in that context. The goal is spoken of, but the self is not involved. You, sir, teach the Dhamma for giving up greed, hate, and delusion, so your teaching is well explained. You, sir, are practicing for the giving up of greed, hate, and delusion. You, in the world, are practicing well. And you have given up greed, hate, and delusion. Therefore, you, in this world have done well. And he says, excellent, excellent. As if uh, you were writing what was overturned or revealing what was hidden, pointing out the path to one who is lost, or lighting a lamp in the dark so people with clear eyes can see what's there. Venerable Ananda, you have made the teaching clear in many ways. And then this householder goes to refuge to the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, becoming a lay follower. So he became a lay follower not based on being told, okay, yeah, yeah. We take the 5 precepts and we avoid killing, stealing, and adultery and lying and intoxicants, and we go to the temple, a couple of times a week if we can, or we go on the Uposatha observance. We sit and listen to Dhamma talk and we bow. We do a lot of bowing, yeah, and bow here and bow there. We chant sometimes. Sometimes it's in Pali, sometimes it's in our native language. We eat a big potluck meal every day. You're welcome to participate. And that wasn't the thing that got the household to be like, oh yeah, Buddhism. Buddhism is well practiced. It's well explained. This is great. Sign me up. Instead, Ananda said, well, what do you think? Yeah. What is good? Well, maybe you already know. If somebody were saying, hey, it's good to give up greed, hatred, and delusion, would you say, well, yeah, that is good? And the householder said, yeah, okay. I totally agree with that. Maybe I wasn't conceiving it that way, right? But now that you mention it, I do consider that to be something that is good. But what if somebody was doing that? Well, that would be good. But what if somebody had done that? Well, then they would have done well. That would be, oh, it's not about a self. It's not about becoming one thing for the eradication of another, or getting in a particular category of people so that you will be saved. The Dhamma is just here, laid out, available for everybody. And the middle way is to walk between these two extremes of becoming and unbecoming, to find the path where no karma needs to be generated towards existence in any realm, and that you can just let things follow their own course, their own causes and conditions. Person arrives at their own conclusion. It's like, oh, it's here and it's available. And if I too were to undertake this practice for giving up greed, hatred, and delusion, then I would be practicing well. This is the essence of the triple refuge, right? To see that truth is there, that people have done it, and that if you do it, you too will be doing it and will eventually accomplish this goal. So the middle way is like this. It's simple, it's straightforward. Now this is Majjhima Nikaya 141, the Satya Vibhanga Sutta. And this is a great sutta, a sutta you can always come back to, with Venerable Sariputta laying out the Four Noble Truths. He's laying out the different aspects of dependent origination. He describes it all. And I go here specifically because we have a nice little kind of cheat sheet for the Eightfold Path, right? So he defines for us right view, right speech, right action, right livelihood, effort, and so forth. So we can take a look at these and we can, maybe in this context, we can see for ourselves that it's not about what we become. It's not about that we follow a particular program. It's not even so much about a particular quantity of results. Yeah, we don't have to get this much done today and this much done tomorrow and this much done. It's more about, are we cultivating? Are we abandoning what needs to be abandoned? And are we developing what needs to be developed in order for the right causes and conditions to be in place? And if so, then no becoming or unbecoming is necessary. It's more about the karma, and it's this karma, this action, which leads to the ending of action, the ending of the need for any action or inclination towards becoming. So what is right view? Well, it's knowing about suffering, the origin of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the practice that leads to cessation of suffering. This is the entry point to the Eightfold Path. And we ask ourselves, okay, this is describing, it's kind of prescribing something, right? It's to really understand and look at the Four Noble Truths. In order to do this, there is something we have to let go of. We have to let go of a lot of doubt, a lot of discursive thinking, a lot of trying to find truths in the world uh, that are relative truths. Like folk wisdom and stuff, relying on that. They're trying to find the right diet, or trying to find the right television program, or trying to find the right companion. We have to abandon trying to find the answer to our problems in some particular solution and recognize the problem itself is suffering. That's what's driving us. This was motivating us because we don't want to suffer, but it keeps showing up. Yeah. So there is an attending to right view and learning about the suffering and the causes and the conditions and the path which leads us out. But in some ways, this is not so much doing as it is opening our eyes and opening our minds to the reality that's already in front of us. We are already suffering. Yeah, and some teachers would be like, if you can't see it, just try to sit still for 5 minutes. Trust me, you will see suffering. It'll literally try to drag you out of your chair. It's that simple. We overlook it. So just stop overlooking it and attend to it as it arises. And you will learn this right view. This is not about becoming. You don't have to be a person with a little card in their pocket that you pull out and you're like, okay, it's first noble truth, second noble truth, third noble truth. Okay, good. You put it back in there and you're set. It's more about, do you opt out of it by trying to find happiness in the world? Or do you on occasion sit and reflect? It's like, okay, that was involved with greed, hatred, and delusion, and therefore it led to suffering. Look at that. It's the truth that's just there for everybody to see. What is right thought or right intention? The Buddha says this is thoughts of renunciation, goodwill, and harmlessness. Yeah. So these are kinds of it's a kind of pattern of thoughts that abandon something. They abandon greed in terms of renunciation. They abandon ill will in terms of goodwill, and they abandon cruelty in terms of developing harmlessness. And yet, it's not terribly prescriptive, right? It's not saying, okay, you have to be an ascetic. You have to be a loving, kind, person who goes up and down the street saying, "May you be well, may you be happy, may you be well, may you be happy." You can if you want, but you don't have to. Don't be a jerk. Yeah, don't hate people. It's not that you have to go around and sweep every little animal out of your path, or worry that anything you do that might harm another creature you just can't do, and you live in a bubble because it's so hard to exist in this world without competing with other life forms. You don't have to worry about that or develop a whole lifestyle around that, but simply don't seek to harm, or don't be insensitive to the harming of other beings. Yeah, try to be free from harmfulness and indifference towards other beings, and you're good. This is a middle way. You don't have to develop a whole lot of karma in a particular direction. Just abandon all of these other ways you've been doing that led to greed, hatred, and delusion taking root in the mind. What is right speech? And this is where we get to refraining. It's refraining from lying, divisive speech, harsh speech, and talking nonsense, just chit chatting. And it couldn't be simpler than that. If you abandon these kinds of speech, which divide people and waste time and are founded in ill will, then whether or not you speak it's kind of up to you, but it's not everything else you say will be kind of okay. Yeah. If you say less, probably you'll put your foot in your mouth less and that'll work. But what you say, if you're not speaking with greed, hatred, and delusion, will be okay. And this is the middle way. It's not having to create a new you to avoid the old you. It's rather abandon these particular habits. And those habits which remain will be okay, will be in line with the Eightfold Path. And you'll know because you'll wake up one day and you'll say, I'm suffering a lot less. Where did it go? Well, it was associated with those old patterns. And if those old patterns don't arise, then the suffering doesn't arise. What is right action? Well, it's refraining from killing living creatures, stealing, and sexual misconduct. It's straightforward. Yeah, the abandoning of a particular lines of action creates peace in our lives. And it's not that we have to, so we have to go on the campaign trail to abolish the death penalty. Yeah, we're like, no killing whatsoever on this planet should be allowed. No humans should kill other humans, and fighting and creating a political stance and a political movement. And until no human being is ever killing another human being, will we rest? No, that would be a lot of suffering. That'd be a lot of work. That'd be a lot of effort in a particular towards a particular result. Yeah, and it would necessitate a lot of becoming and taking standpoints and getting in arguments. And that's not what's being suggested here. We personally give up that karma, which is associated with killing and stealing and sexual misconduct. And then we personally get to experience what it is like to not be acting out of greed, hatred, and delusion. Another good example of this is right livelihood. And here we get the sort of abbreviated version. What is right livelihood? Is when a disciple gives up wrong livelihood and earns right livelihood. And that's often irked me that we because there is a definition of right livelihood. Yeah, wrong livelihood is the trade in people for slavery, animals for slaughter, the trading in drugs and intoxicants, and weapons and in poisons. Yeah, these are things which are the kind of the acids which erode society. Yeah, these different practices. Yeah, and if we earn our livelihood through these, we will find that we don't get ahead because we're getting whatever we get, we're getting at somebody else's expense, and that always drags us down. And so that's wrong livelihood, and then right livelihood is what's left over. It's that straightforward. You don't have a long list of, well, these are the acceptable occupations for somebody who's cultivating the Eightfold Path. Rather, what we find is when we abandon the very obvious wrong livelihoods, like working for a weapon manufacturer or working in a slaughterhouse, when we abandon those, we have just a regular livelihood, yeah, a regular occupation. And we'll find that there will be these little things that come up in the middle where we have to make some decisions to shift, mold, cultivate this livelihood so that it remains pure. And that effort is what's required to make any old livelihood right livelihood. For example, we might become a monastic. We're like, okay, I'm going to be free from killing all living beings. I'm not going to work in a slaughterhouse. I'm not going to be a soldier who goes off to war. I'm going to be a monk. And we go to the temple and we're assigned to live in a particular cabin, and it's overrun with squirrels who are living in the roof. And so if we were to go up there and set a bunch of traps, and they grab up the squirrels and flatten them, we would have made this seemingly right livelihood wrong by undertaking it in that way. So it's not as clear cut as do this and you'll be good. It's rather it takes some cultivation, but once you've gotten away from what's wrong, it doesn't take that much. Yeah. And it works itself out. This is a middle way. You don't have to create a whole identity around this. And then we have the meditative parts of the Eightfold Path. Yeah, the right effort is a lot like how Ananda described it. Yeah, it's making effort to abandon the bad qualities that are arising, effort to keep them from arising in the future, effort to cultivate unarisen, wholesome qualities, and the effort to preserve those wholesome qualities which have arisen. And this is very nuanced. It's not laying out all the things that you've got to do. It's saying when you see a bad habit, work to get rid of it. When you see a good habit, work to preserve it. And eventually, what you find when all of the bad habits have been abandoned and all the good habits have been made strong and cultivated so that they arise on their own, you don't need karma. You don't even need to exist. The program runs itself. So much more with mindfulness. Yeah, at first it's a lot of work, and we have to say, "Okay, I'm meditating right now. Just don't bug me. I'm being mindful." And at that moment, yeah, it's a lot of becoming. Was like just let me meditate. So I'm being peaceful. This is for your benefit. Leave me alone. But eventually we get to the point where all the people around us are aware. We become so skillful that we just find these empty spaces in the place where we live where we can just go and sit quietly, yeah, and be mindful, and things are moving around us and we're just not getting involved. And it can be that simple and that straightforward, right? This is the way of not not becoming and not unbecoming, but non-becoming. And this is one uh, it's actually a beautiful demonstration of this I read in a book once by Thomas Merton. And so when you think of Buddhist meditators, you probably don't think of a Trappist monk, uh, Catholic Christian monk, but he wrote about his meditation, and what he's describing is pretty much in line with what jhana meditators describe. So I'm reading one of his accounts, and he goes up to this top of a particular building, to the attic. He found himself a little spot where he could, just kind of relax and be out of the way. And he was out looking at the monastery as people are coming and going. I think they make jam or something. They're very active at that particular monastery. They have things that they make and sell. And he was watching all of this, and he got into samadhi, and the world suddenly became very vivid and beautiful, and he had this sort of ecstatic experience of the mind coming to composure through not being, not doing. He was the master of novices. He had all of these responsibilities. He's a well-known author. People were coming to the monastery just to see him. Yeah. But in that moment, he found a little nook somewhere where he didn't have to exist. And that actually was incredibly blissful. And this is our hint. That samadhi is not something we become. We don't become the guy who does jhana. We don't become the ultimate meditator. But in those instances where we kind of maneuver things very skillfully, getting away from the greed, the hatred, and delusion, and we find this quiet little spot somewhere where those aren't going to come up, where they aren't going to bother us, and we stop existing. We don't need to put any energy into being anything, that we don't exist in tangible ways. Like, people are not interacting with us, people are not seeking us out. We don't have responsibilities in that moment. In a very tangible way, we do not exist. But also, from our perspective, from our mental perspective, there is no karma, there's no action that needs to be done. And because it's beautiful, because it's relaxing, because it's peaceful, because it is the cessation of suffering, what we realize is, why would I crave for the suffering to come back? Because the craving for more existence, the craving to get back into it, the craving to go back and do some stuff, would just lead us back into suffering. And so those moments when we get out, we have attained the middle way. There's nothing more that needs to be done. And this is, once we get the hang of it, we know exactly where to go for this non becoming. All right. So, with that, why don't we go do that? Why don't we maneuver ourselves skillfully, threading ourselves between all of the crazy traps that Mara has laid out for us, tiptoeing around the snares and the pitfalls, and find that little nook wherever it is where we do not have to exist. And see if maybe if we stop attending to ourselves just long enough, we do stop existing. And maybe, just maybe, we'll like it. Right? So we'll go back to our sitting and walking, and just a little over 2 hours, I guess, we'll come back together. And if there's any questions or comments or discussion we want to have happen, or if you've got to go, that's fine. But that'll be the time we can do it. Otherwise, it's most of our afternoon.